Hello, I'm Anna Brewster and I am here to tell you all about March's Art Club. So, welcome. We are going to be doing some stick and splatter nests in the studio this month, and this is definitely something you can join in with at home. As you see, I've got my funkiest apron on because we're going to make a bit of a mess. So grab some old clothes. I'm going to give you an ingredients list in a minute, and we're going to be making this, which is an absolutely perfect Easter card or a nice little craft project, incredibly manageable in about half an hour. So grab yourself a cup of tea and let's get going. So first of all, we need to think about what we're going to need, and it's worth getting all this stuff out before you get going. So for this little mini project, you are going to need a smallish paintbrush. Doesn't really matter what you've got, it doesn't have to be a particularly nice or fancy one. You need some watercolour or some ink, anything you can mix a brown from. Not acrylic, that's a bit gloopy, but anything like watercolour or anything you've got lying about. You need some rough paper, which is what I've got here. It's just a pad of sketch paper. A toothbrush or an old brush, which is what I'm going to use. This is a really manky old brush, but it will do the job absolutely admirably. You want something quite stiff with little stiff bristles, so have a look around the house, and if you've got an old toothbrush kicking about, that is absolutely perfect. A stick, again, doesn't really matter what type of stick you have. Like the brush, it just needs to be a stick with a point on it, and this was a piece of driftwood that I found on the beach, but something you've just pruned off a hedge is absolutely fine. Some newspaper or something to cover the perimeter, basically, because you're going to make a mess, and I don't want to be responsible for you making a horrifying mess all over your kitchen table. Some salt. Optional extra, but I find these little sachets to be quite useful if you've got any sort of table salt you've got at home. If it's got big grains, that's fun too. Some scissors and glue, that's right at the end, so we won't be needing that up front. If you've got all of those things to hand, then all is good. If you haven't, you can always pause this and go off and find them, and then you'll be ready to rock and roll. So we've got two parts to this project. We've got the nest, and we've got the little eggs to go in it. So what I'm going to suggest doing is painting the eggs first, and the reason for that is that you can then stick them on a radiator to dry or put them to one side, and it means that you've got a little bit more time to cut them out and stick them on and do other things with them later. So I am going to paint some robin's eggs, which are quite a vibrant blue. I don't know if you can see the colour. Yes, you can. So this is a lovely, this is like a cerulean blue. I should have said blue paint as well, shouldn't I? Terrible, my apologies. Brown paint and blue paint, but equally, not all bird eggs are blue. You could do white ones, you could do pale ones. This one, or you could do bright yellow ones. It's entirely up to you. This is your bird, your nest, and your imagination. So don't fret too much about the egg shapes. Just get them, you want maybe 3, and you want to get them quite wet and roughly the same size. You can always cut round to make them a bit tidier. Get loads of paint on there. And when you've painted one, what you can do is you can get a little bit of salt. Make sure it's still quite wet in the middle. And just scatter a little bit of your salt on it. And what the salt does is it kind of slurps the paint up and makes interesting marks. So let's do my second egg. And I'll show you another technique that we can use as well. So, as I said, this is stick and splatter. So the splatter is going to get involved in a minute, because we all love a bit of splatter. I've got a very funky apron on, as you can see, which is going to protect me. I strongly recommend not wearing your best clothes for this. Okay, so I've got 3 eggs now. Let's just pop that in there a minute. A little tiny bit more salt. You can see it doing, can you see it's doing funny things? As soon as the salt hits the, I don't know if I can get that a little bit closer. Can you see what it's doing? It's quite interesting. And as it dries, you have to be really patient with this and actually just let it dry. What you can do as well, because robin eggs have little brown speckles on, if I recall correctly. I might be wrong. I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm not right. So with my brush, I've just mixed a little bit of brown, and I'm going to just have a gentle flick. Not a massive one, just a little one, because that's going to run. You see, that's going to run. But what I'll do is I'll flick some more over the top in a little bit. So they're going to sit there and dry. And while they are drying, I'm going to start working on the other thing on the piece of paper. This is an A3 sheet of paper, so it's quite big. You could do this tiny. You could make a little, if you like small things, you could go for really small. I haven't got my glasses with me, and frankly, I don't often work small anyway, so I'm not going to be doing that today. The good thing about using an old sheet for this is I don't need to find some kitchen roll, so I'm going to use that too. If you wonder what I'm doing, I'm just drying the brush a little. To do our nest, we're going to adopt a technique which I quite like, which is we're going to put a very rough circle, roughly how big we want our nest to be. So this is all going to vanish in the kind of the scheme of things, and then with sleeve rolled up, I'm going to start writing on it. I don't know if you can see what I'm writing, but I'm writing nest. You don't have to write nest, you could write anything you like. Now the problem I have given myself here slightly is that it's going to be difficult to turn the paper around, so at this point I might adopt my, I might employ my scissors to just do that, which will make it fractionally easier to keep turning the thing that I'm working on round. So I'm going to start round the outside. You can hear people at the coffee shop outside having a jolly time. That's nice. I'm fortunate enough to have my studio next to a coffee shop, and I do end up ingesting an awful lot of caffeine during the day. Now, can you see what I'm doing here? I'm not worrying about how much like the word it is. It's pretty quick and dirty. It's not neat and tidy. You could do this with a biro, you could do it with a pen, you could do it with absolutely anything you liked. That's the nice thing about this. You can you can vary the colour of the brown. So I've just added a little bit of blue into my brown there, a little bit of deep blue, and I'll start to get some different colours going on. And you can just use this as a nice little relaxing exercise in using your brush. We're just chilling out and we are just doodling essentially. And as you keep going round, you will start to see that it looks increasingly, let's put a bit more blue. Oh, that's an interesting blue. I think that was Prussian blue. That wasn't the one I was aiming for. Doesn't matter. Any blue mixed into a brown will give you a deeper brown, pretty much. But as I say, you could do this with felt tips, you could do this with anything that you had about. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that you're making a nest out of words. You could even, if you were feeling poetic, go off and write a little bird poem, or find a poem you really love, maybe about spring, maybe about birds, and use that as your text instead, and just write it as you go round. Nest, nest, nest. And somebody came into the studio while I was doing the practice run for this earlier, and they didn't realise that it said nest until I pointed this out to them, which I thought was quite interesting, because we're not expecting to see it. So it's like a little hidden surprise, a bit like an egg itself. Whoop, that's quite a deep brown, but that's fine. Just put some back into there. I tend to go sort of deeper as I get towards the middle of the nest, because it just gives it sort of a feeling of slight more three-dimensional, gives it more of a three-dimensional feel. But again, this really doesn't matter. This is about having a bit of fun. Put some more deep colours around the edge as well. It's really starting to look quite twiggy now, isn't it? Now we haven't got to the stick or the splatter yet, so you're probably thinking, hang on a minute, this is not what I thought I was going to be doing. Where is my stick? Where's this getting involved? I suppose we have done a little bit of splatter, but we're going to do a little bit more in a minute. Now I've got robins nesting in my garden at the moment, and I've got a bit of a thing about robins. I love robins, so that's why I've gone for these blue eggs. But obviously this would be like, if this was an actual robin's nest, these would be very massive robins, because then their eggs are nowhere near that size. So when you've kind of covered most of it and you're happy with your edges and kind of where things are, you can always add more to this. What you're going to do is you're going to get your stick, and I mixed up a little pot of brown here just to make my life a little bit easier, really, more than anything else. There we go, there's my pot of brown. Get some more brown in there. Whoops, stuff going everywhere already, I haven't even started it yet. And what I like to do is just trace around with just using the stick to kind of circle. Don't draw a perfect circle like that. Just twiggy, think twiggy. Just like that, just to give it a bit of shape. There we go. You could do this with several different versions of your brown if you wanted to. And because the paint's quite wet still in places, that can be quite, you can get some interesting things, sort of marks moving into each other, and you'll get marks in the paper. There we go. So we've got a bit of a rough, a nesty sort of thing going on. We've got a few twiggy bits around the outside. Now, my eggs are drying a little bit, so what I'm going to do is put another layer of splatter on that, because so to get splatter, the best thing to do is dry your brush off and then load it. But you might need to practice this a little bit, because splattering takes a little bit of practice to work out how much water you need compared to how much paint or how much ink or whatever. You want the brush dry enough that nothing falls off it if you're just shaking it about. But when you flick it, and I would recommend doing it like this, you will get lovely speckles. And you're going for quite fine speckles on here. So you can see there, I've got this very fine speckle going on. Now, that's going to need to dry before I can do anything else. But while I've got some of that brown going on, I'm going to put a bit on the nest as well. So again, lots of fun. Blip, 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 all the way around the edge. Just makes it a little bit interesting. And if you want to mix a slightly different brown, which I am doing now, get some. The colours I'm using for this, actually, the very reddy brown is a pigment called Red Earth. No, it's not, I'm lying, it's called red oxide. It's basically made out of rust, as far as I can make out. And it is a Daniel Smith paint, artist quality paint, but you don't have to use that. You can mix a brown from almost anything. Generally, if you mix together a red and a yellow and a blue in varying proportions, you'll get different browns happening. So I've got a bit of a darker one here, a little bit of a darker splatter. There, okay. So I'm going to I'll just put a bit more, some bigger splots. There we go. Now, this is all going to need to dry. You could do as many bits of it. I mean, for example, you could use a pen to do some more little twigs. You could use the stick to draw some. It's entirely your call how much you want to add to this. But I'm just going to stop there because I think this needs to be relatively simple. And what I'm going to do is now let this dry. Don't rush your salt. If you've put salt on, let it dry in its own time, because it will make much more beautiful patterns. If you try and blast it with a hairdryer or something, it won't come out nearly as pretty. So just pop it on a radiator, just leave it somewhere to sit for a bit, go off and make a cup of tea, and by the time you come back it will all be done. Okay, so we have got dry eggs, dry nest. You might notice that magically they don't look quite the same as the one I was just working on. There is a good reason for that. I've done what is known in the trade as a blue peter. If you are viewing this from a country that is not the UK, basically Blue Peter was a children's programme, and they were often doing craft activities, and they always had a pre-prepared version for about halfway through to save time. So in the interest of you not having to sit and watch me have my cup of tea while this dries, I made one earlier. And you can see here that the salt has formed quite interesting crystally bits on here. So what we do then is you just rub them off with your finger. You don't really want the salt in your final picture. So you just rub the crystals off. And this is another reason why you want to keep it neat and tidy and put cloths down and things, because you end up with salt all over the place. So that one I've rubbed off now, and you can see how you get these interesting marks. Let's do this one. Sometimes it helps to just scrub it off with a fingernail or whatever you've got to hand. Really, you won't damage it. It'll be fine. I mean, this isn't fancy paper, and it's still fine. Look at the interesting marks on that one. They're really nice. I've got one more egg down here. So I've got maybe 2 or 3 layers of brown speckle on the eggs. So some of them have melted into the blue because they were still wet when I put them on, and others, as it dried, I added a few more layers of speckle. So you've got this kind of 3-dimensional layering of speckle, which is quite fun. Now, I am lousy at cutting out symmetrical things. I am. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make an egg shape template first before I do anything else. So I've just folded the paper in half. We'll see what this comes out like. It probably won't look anything like an egg, and I'll have to fiddle with it to get it right. But let's have a look at that. Whoa, far too wide. Okay. So all you're doing here is you're saving yourself a load of hassle. I think they're more pointy at the end, aren't they, really? Let's go for that. Well, that's not bad. Yeah, so I've got an egg shape here, and then what I'm going to do, this is just makes it so much easier. I haven't got a pencil to hand, but it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to use a pen to draw roughly around where I'm going to cut out. And if I do that, then I don't need to worry about... so you can see I've gone... You could do it with a pencil. I don't have a pencil to hand, but if you draw it with a pencil, you'd be able to rub it out afterwards without rubbing the paint out. But yeah, this I'm just going to cut around slightly inside that. So... I mean, to be honest, it doesn't have to be perfect, and I am a big fan of not perfect anyway, because perfect's a bit boring, isn't it? Here we go. So we're just going to cut that out. Bingo, there's your bird egg. And then all you need to do is do that 3 times. Now I could do this very cunningly. If I could work out how to, do you know what? Maybe I can work out how to speed up the video. Shall we do that? Could do with a laugh. If I can't do it, I'll just cut that section out. I can paint, but my videography skills are still a bit sketchy. Right, there's one egg. You could just paint, you don't even have to draw, you don't even have to do egg shapes when you're doing your first bit. You could just literally paint a panel of blue and then cut your egg shapes out of that. Or if you are very confident about your ability to cut an egg shape, you don't need to do this stage. I, however, am not. Because I know that cutting out round shapes is actually really hard. Or spherical type shapes. There we go. Two. Maybe there. So now all we need to do, grab some of this. This is just PVA glue, and this is transparent, but it doesn't matter. You can use the white stuff as well. It's absolutely fine. And then you need something to put, again, any old crummy brush will work. Let me see if I've got one. That one will do. Just put that on there. Give it a good old... I think I'm going to arrange mine kind of in a pattern. It's all very kind of stylized anyway, so it doesn't matter if you don't have to make this look super realistic if you don't want to, or you absolutely can if you want to. It's your call. I think this would make a really nice Easter card. So if you are in the mood for an Easter card making type session, you could knock up a whole load of these. If you just painted a big sheet of paper blue, just make sure they're all squashed down. And there we go, a little Easter nest. Okay, well I hope you enjoyed that. It's a really nice little mini project to have a go at, suitable for any age. You don't need a huge amount of stuff for it, and if you tackle this one at home, I would love to see what you make, so send me a message. You can find me on Instagram. I'm Sidmouth Skies on there, and I'm Anna Brewster Art pretty much everywhere else, including Facebook. If you are enjoying the mini projects, do subscribe to my YouTube channel, because that way it will let you know when the next one comes along, and there will be another one around the start of April and throughout the year. Happy Easter!